What happens when a Las Vegas Reformed Jewish rabbi and a Las Vegas Presbyterian pastor have a conversation as friends? They discover that no matter where you live or what you believe, faith matters. In this episode of Faith Matters, Rabbi Sanford Akselrad from Congregation Yer Tamid and Reverend Adrian from Green Valley Presbyterian Church talk about the challenges of faith, how you view God's involvement in the world, if you can hold God accountable for man's actions. Is it better being a person with or without faith? And what you can do to feel closer to God.
Adrian, good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you. It's been a long time.
I know, it's been a while. So we're pretty busy here with the holidays of Passover and Easter and just a lot going on in the world. But sometimes we forget about the basics of life itself. And I don't know about you, but I'm assuming as a fellow pastor, people will come up to you and they feel we're the experts in God. And they'll look at the world and they'll see all the fighting and all the things that are going wrong. And they go, well, what's God doing? If this is the best God could do, well, he's not in the major leagues. What do you tell them? I can share a little bit about what I say, but what do you tell them about God's involvement in the world? And explaining it with all the
I will
bad
sometimes
stuff.
turn it around to a question and say, okay, this is clearly you're thinking about this. This is something that obviously must be affecting you. And so tell me, where do you see God in your own life? And then to share openly with them that I think all of us, even the person of deepest faith, struggles with where is God at this moment when we see a tragedy, right? All of us, I think, would say that at times. And that isn't that the challenge of faith, to recognize that even when we don't understand the circumstances of our world, to recognize that God is still sovereign, that God is still in control. Doesn't mean I understand God's ways, but I think to your question, that is a major question of a young demographic. Okay, yeah. Tell me what faith is going to do.
Could be of an old demographic also, right?
Right.
They're looking at the world or they're looking at their mortality. So I have a slightly different response. So, because, for Jews, they'll say, where was God during the Holocaust?
Right.
Or, now we have the war in Israel. Where's God? Ukraine, loved one has cancer. So when they talk in the broad sense about war, I say, it sounds like a human problem to me and not a God problem. All right? The fact that human beings are killing each other is a problem of man versus man with a capital M. It's not God who is pushing us to kill each other. It is us. So that's the first clarification I want to make, is that you cannot hold God responsible for human beings' actions. We are born with choice. And if the choice is to act with evil, that's our choice. If it's to act with goodness and care, that's our choice. In Judaism, we don't have, the devil. It may be within your religious tradition, we can get into that. So we have solely human responsibility to choose between good and evil, not up to God. It's up to us. Having said that, the other thing is that I like to think that if the Holocaust, using an extreme example, makes faith in God difficult, it makes faith in human beings impossible. And therefore, we need God to give us strength, courage, fortitude when we look at the world, which can be devoid of faith and filled with man's inhumanity to man. We desperately need a God presence for that. or where are we? We're alone and we're without a moral compass.
One of the things that I shared on Sunday in my sermon was that even the atheist has taken a position of faith. And for someone who says, but you can't prove God, you can't prove that God exists, the atheist is in the same position. The atheist cannot prove that God does not exist. And so we find that to say both, when people say, well, I don't have faith, I'm like, well, you're living by something that is inspiring your actions, that's inspiring the way, whether you think everything is predetermined or you think you have choice or you think it's somewhere in the middle, that everyone exercises faith at some level. They may not be a person of faith in the traditional sense of the word, but for the agnostic, they're still searching. For the atheist, they're looking. And so one of the things that I often wonder is what causes, do we need God? Can we not have God? What causes someone to be so angry about wanting to prove that God doesn't exist? And pastorally, I stand back and say, okay, they're angry, they're hurting. Is there anger toward God because God has somehow disappointed them? Is there anger toward the way they've been treated by someone?
I think it's that the God they've been taught about does not jive with their real world experience.
Yes.
So if in their view God is Santa Claus, or if you can say a prayer and therefore God does what you pray for, I tell them that's called magic.
Right.
Not only that, it means if I could say a prayer and God has to do what I say, that could also mean that I'm more powerful than God. So it's akin to taking, that genie's a lamp and rubbing it with prayer, and then out pops God. And I say, God, I command you to heal my loved one. Who's got the power? I got the power over the genie. So when people have that kind of Santa Claus or magical view of God, everyone is going to experience some sadness. It's going to be an illness, a tragic accident, a loss of work. And if it was as easy as saying a prayer to prevent all those things, there would never be anyone who died of cancer. There would never be anyone who was unemployed. So obviously that's not how it works. But also to your point, when people look at the world and they say, this world is messed up, there can't be a God, I'll say, but all this can't be an accident either. Right? When someone goes to the tailor and says, well, who made that suit? And the tailor said, the tailor made the suit. Who made the world? It's not an accident. How could all of this in our lives just be a pure accident? We may not understand the mechanism in which we became, here on earth, but it happens. And therefore, we feel that if it's not an accident, then there's a meaning behind it. And even for the atheists or agnostics, I would argue that if you're not sure, is your life better off being a person of faith, or is it better off being a person without faith? Because if you're a person of faith, you can draw upon that to give you strength. Unless you have what I call the wrong definition of God, and then it leads to what, as you pointed out, disappointment. Because they just,
anger.
Yeah, and anger. And I would say the God that you're praying to is one that I don't pray to either, right?
I often say to people,
I agree with you. I don't think, you can say the prayer and boom, loved one's cured of cancer. Not to say there's not miracles. That's a category over here, but we have to act as if there are not miracles and that it relies upon us as human beings to use the wisdom God's endowed us with.
I often say to people that if my human finite mind could fully understand the mind of God, then that God would cease to be worthy of my worship. Because God, by nature, is something that transcends humanity, something that transcends our understanding. And I think so often we're guilty of trying to say, I need to be able to contain God to fully understand. We'll never understand the mind of God. And as you say with prayer, we often think, well, God disappointed me. Maybe in our mind, from what I can see at the moment, I might be disappointed. But I think in eternity, we will begin to understand God's perfect plans. We'll never understand that. And in my understanding, we will never understand the mind of God on this earth, and we'll never understand why things go the way they do, why we might perceive that a prayer was unanswered. I can't tell you why your loved one wasn't cured of cancer. What I can do is sit with you and grieve with you and show you I care. I think
But
that's
again, it goes back to my definition of God. If
yes.
you say, you can say a prayer and then God removes that cancer, we don't need doctors anymore, do we? You know,
No.
so that's again magical thinking. But God created a world in which there are rules, there's laws of nature. Death is not necessarily a tragedy, and therefore, it doesn't mean that when our loved ones are ill, we can't find strength through our faith and belief in God. And having said that, the alternative, which you mentioned, is anger, creates this barrier between that person and God. And if God tries to reach out and you're not, there's no hand to be held. And I think in times of crisis, that's when we do need to feel that there is a reason, even if it's beyond our understanding, because that serves as a source of solace and strength.
Do you perceive pastorally, as a rabbi, that there are pivotal moments in someone's life when they're closer to becoming a person of faith? So someone who questions, someone who has a very difficult time as practicing faith, no matter what tradition they come from.
I would say a person might have an aha moment
Mm-hmm.
when they look at their life and they see that there's been a turning point, and that becomes an aha moment. They may not know that aha moment is the aha moment, but they may recognize it a year from now or 50 years from now or 30 years. And when they look at that moment and they realize that that changed the course of their life, it may lead them to faith. I always tell people, miracles aren't always just about the what, it's about the when. The Red Sea could part every single day, but if it didn't part exactly when the Israelites were there, then the when would have meant the miracle was
They missed
missed.
it, right? They
Yeah,
didn't see it.
they didn't see it.
Yeah.
So the miracles are not just about what's, it's about when. And I think we say often seeing is believing, but I say believing is seeing. When you see the world through eyes of faith, you see the world in a different place. And then you also can see your place in the world differently as well.
I share that same thought often. In terms of ministry, I will say, when you believe, you begin to see things that you can't see otherwise. And I often openly share with people, even from the pulpit on a Sunday morning, I can't make you believe. I believe belief in itself is a gift that comes to us from God, the gift of faith.
Yeah.
And so I thank God every day that I have the gift of faith.
Gratitude can lead to faith.
Yes.
The Jewish tradition, if someone was Orthodox, they'd begin every day with a prayer of gratitude
Hmm.
called Modeh Ani. begins with gratitude. It's not guaranteed you're going to open your eyes after you close them the night before.
Right.
Not guaranteed. So you wake up and you go, thank God, here I am, Modeh Ani. And I think
I have one more day.
part of faith is gratitude, to live in gratitude and appreciation.
So we
And
talk about part of faith is to live in gratitude, to live in appreciation. And so I think that's really beginning to answer my question. And what would you say to someone who says, Rabbi, I really want to grow in my faith, but what can I do to feel closer to God? I don't feel close right now. You must have that question frequently.
yeah, it's, maybe once a month or whatever. So, after you kind of have a real conversation about what they do or what
Mhm.
they don't do, it's usually they don't feel close because they have not created a ritualization of acts that could bring them closer to God. And those rituals will eventually become second nature to them and fill their life with more faith than they realize. So, for example, if they come to a synagogue and they don't feel anything because they've never been, since they were kids, and they don't know the melodies and they don't know the people. So where's God? No, they're stuck in their alienation instead of, the sense of community. But if they kept coming for a while and they made friends, all of a sudden, all that human stuff kind of disappears and they can hold that prayer book in their hand and they can start focusing on the prayers. And one prayer is going to stand out and it's going to speak to them in that moment because they'll be ready to receive it. Um, another thing is when you do acts of goodness, you become, I think, a person that's enriched as a person of faith because you may not see the face of God, but according to Judaism, you can see where God has been. You follow in God's footsteps.
Mhm.
So if you follow in God's footsteps, that means you're doing good things. And I think most people know when you do good things, there's a goodness that fills your heart that allows you to live in this beautiful earth, knowing that you've done something to make a difference.
And those
And
good acts we would call a mitzvah, correct?
in Judaism, yeah, we might
And
call
so
them a
when we
mitzvah.
do a mitzvah in Judaism, and we're called to do acts of compassion, I think there's also something that happens that I see our common humanity.
Yeah,
And and if we see our common humanity, then I see the image of God in you because we're made in the image of God.
and that can bring you
And that
closer to
that
God.
act of serving also goes back to gratitude because I realize I have something that I can give. Well, if I have something that I can give and I want to be grateful, how do I express that gratitude? I've often said I feel sorry for the person that wants to express gratitude but doesn't believe in God.
And I would say, let them feel gratitude and it'll lead them to God,
Yes. Yeah. Because ultimately, well, where
right?
did this blessing come from?
Yeah, where did the blessing come from?
I think in our society today, in this tech-driven digital society, we have the opportunity to draw closer to God or to really pull away, imagining that we're more and more really not dependent upon God's grace. And yet, what I see is that these questions we've talked about today are questions that you and I hear repeatedly, and it doesn't matter the age of the person.
Repeatedly.
People are saying, I need space for God. And those
And
that are longing to believe are saying, okay, help me to discover this faith. This conversation could have gone on and on for hours, but I think
maybe we'll have a part two and a part three.
yeah, yeah. You may
But
be, but I'm not good enough to keep their attention this long. So
well, listen, it's called Faith Matters. So what a great topic
it
for a
is.
podcast called Faith Matters. And we hope that our listeners who might be struggling with their belief in God come to find through acts of charity and goodness and prayer, compassion and love, begin to understand what it means to feel blessed in their life. And that feeling of being blessed, hopefully will allow them to feel that there is something greater than themselves that gives them that feeling and serves as a moral compass in their lives. I hope and I pray.
That's why I love those Jewish words, Baruchim Habaim. May they be blessed in their coming. I mean, that's what we pray as people, as we encounter others, as they encounter us, that somehow we can be a small instrument of blessing.
Please. So again, thank you, gentle listeners. We look forward to another podcast very soon. And shalom, peace to all.
Shalom, grace and peace.
Faith Matters features Rabbi Sanford Akselrad from Congregation Yer Tamid and Reverend Adrian Dahl from Green Valley Presbyterian Church and is produced by Leslie Snadowsky. We hope you join us again for our next podcast episode of Faith Matters.